All right, lovely ladies, welcome to week 2 of 8 weeks to wellness. I hope you guys have had an absolutely awesome week, and I'm so excited to dive into today's topic. Today is something I am very, very passionate about, and it is incorporating your menstrual cycle into your lifestyle and training. I think the biggest thing is that when it comes down to fully aligning your life with your menstrual cycle, often we think it's a process and we think it's a strict sort of routine. If I do this, that, and the other, then every 28 days I'll bleed. It'll only be for 4 to 5 days. And in those 4 to 5 days, it will be pain-free if I do everything right, if I do everything right. And I want to ask you to stop. And today, start to see your menstrual cycle as it's a blessing. Yeah, but start to see it as a little bit of a feedback loop and a little bit of communication from your body back to you. It's important to remember that we have the gut-brain connection, but we also have many other bidirectional relationships within our body when it comes to communication through our vagus nerve, which is our sort of main central hub that takes our brain to our body through our nervous system. And so with this, it's important to remember that with our menstrual cycle, this is a piece of our life, okay? See it as the fifth vital sign, which is a fantastic book, where it will tell you. So just like when your blood pressure is crazy high or crazy low, there's potentially something awry in your life that needs to be addressed. Okay. Very similar sort of a thing where your menstrual cycle as a vital sign gets to serve as a feedback loop where if shit is hitting the fan, it's time to address something. Usually when it comes to addressing what is holding you back with your menstrual cycle, the painful symptoms, the painful sort of potential endometriosis, PCOS, all that sort of a thing, usually it comes down to trying to stuff down our emotions and get on with it. And I'm here to tell you today that our cycle is there to remind us that stuffing things down, it just comes up later. And it just manifests in more sort of pain, illness, disease that we don't actually need in our life. And it's not aligned with the lifestyle that we want to live that is healthy, vibrant, and happy. And so my hope today is that this workshop helps to bridge that gap for you. Now, first things first, let's get into what an ovarian cycle or an ovulatory cycle looks like. Now, when it comes to our period, think of it as broken into two halves. So we'll use, for this sort of sake of a description, we'll use a month, okay? So a cycle can last between 28 days to 35 days on average for a healthy cycle. And so with this, let's say it's about a month, okay? The first half is going to be our follicular phase. And this is where we're stimulating our follicle to grow and get ready and prepare our egg so that then when we ovulate and the sperm comes in when we ovulate, we can have a baby. Now, of course, most months, this doesn't happen. So, and then when it does, you've still got to wait another sort of like year and a bit before it can happen again. So we go through this cycle so many times in our life. And when we can learn how to optimize it and learn how to optimize our lifestyle around it, it makes it so much more joyous when we get to watch our body's ebbs and flows and watch how our body responds to the life that we're creating for it. Our second half of the phase is our menstrual cycle is our luteal phase. And so this is obviously where luteal phase gets a bit of a bad rap because this is where our PMS symptoms sit, all that sort of a thing. And so again, my hope today is that bridging the gap and understanding the benefits of our luteal phase, understanding what it's trying to tell us and just how powerful it is, that's my hope today, is that I can get that message through to you. Now, if we have a little bit of a look at this image, so what you'll see here, we've got FSH, which is this white line here, follicle stimulating hormone. We have E2, which is estrogen or estradiol, and that's this blue line around here. We have the luteinizing hormone, which you can see is this yellow line here. And then we have progesterone, which is our beautiful sort of like green agua line here. Now, what I want to explain to you and what I want to really simplify is, again, we have pretty much two phases of the cycle. We've got our first half and our second half, our follicular, our luteal. Okay, when it comes to breaking this down a bit further, though, I want to make sure that we really get the point across for how our body is functioning and what's happening when we have delays and all that sort of thing. So what we can see is with our follicle stimulating hormone, this has a gentle rise as we start bleeding, okay, at the beginning of our cycle. And this stimulates the follicles to grow in our uterus and then release an egg. And hopefully that egg is ready and nice and mature here where we have a nice healthy egg that can be fertilized. What often happens is, so we stimulate the follicles and a few of them grow. And then we have a little bit of a dip, and luteinizing hormone is what brings that follicle stimulating hormone back up. And that's what sort of, if you imagine 5 or 6 follicles getting bigger, 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 okay, the luteinizing hormone is what makes that one stick out. And that's that egg that we're going to ovulate this month, okay? Then from there, our luteinizing hormone will come back down. And if we don't have a cycle, it obviously comes back down. The cycle begins to repeat. Oh, don't have a cycle, don't have a pregnancy, then it will come down and the cycle will repeat itself. Estrogen tends to be low at the very beginning of the cycle, so when we're first bleeding, and then it begins to rise, and we typically feel our best around our ovulation just before. Now, the reason being estrogen is rising, and estrogen is our big feminine energy hormone. But when it comes to estrogen rising, we tend to be much more aligned with the better version of ourselves. Okay. Now, with this, what we end up doing as well is we end up feeling a lot better. We're less inflamed, and we're also able to just better perform throughout the day generally. What will often happen is that with ovulation, you'll also notice, and this is a fun fact, but you'll also notice around ovulation, when estrogen is high, you may notice when you're in the gym, more people staring at you. You may notice when you're in the street, more people staring at you, maybe more people giving you compliments or being kinder to you. When our estrogen is raising and we're in our ovulatory phase, which can last a few days in the middle of our cycle, okay, where we're highly fertile, we're actually giving off pheromones, okay? And these pheromones say, hey, I'm a fertile, beautiful woman. I'm ready to have a baby. And so with this is just from Paleolithic times to keep us alive, to keep the generations coming. But it can be a really fun fact. If you do notice around your ovulation, not only are you usually a bit more chatty, but you'll also notice the people around you tend to be a bit more chatty and open to receiving as well. Then, of course, we have progesterone, and progesterone is pretty chill, pretty relaxed at the first half in our follicular phase of our cycle, and then it begins to raise in our luteal phase. Okay, it's with that raise of progesterone and estrogen that we can sometimes see these sort of PMS symptoms coming up, where we start to experience a little bit of discomfort. Then, of course, everything comes back down and starts again at the beginning of the cycle. Now, so to summarize that a little bit more, we have our key hormones and their roles. So we've got follicle stimulating hormone, which is the hormone that helps to grow the egg in the ovary, I said the uterus, sorry, during the follicular phase. We have E2, which is estradiol, a form of estrogen, and this peaks before ovulation. It helps the egg to mature. And again, it supports our energy, our mood, and our strength. With luteinizing hormone, this triggers ovulation. So this pulls our follicle stimulating hormone up to help us really mature the egg. And then that helps for the release of the egg, which then enables the egg to become, let's say, impregnated, which is a correct word, but allows the egg to then, that's the word we're sticking with. This is where we're at, this prep brain. Sorry, guys. Can't remember off the top of my head. And then we have progesterone. So progesterone rises after ovulation, and it helps to prepare the body for pregnancy, okay? When pregnancy doesn't happen, we get a signal from our brain, stop producing progesterone, and it drops, and then that leads to, with the drop in estrogen and everything else, your next bleed when the inner walls of the uterine lining start to shed away. So when it comes to our periods, again, we've got pretty much two phases, but two halves, and I'm going to break that into 4 phases for you. So we have our period and our bleed. And so if you're lucky, this will be only 3 to 5 days, okay? During our period and bleed, you shouldn't notice too many symptoms at all. You might feel a little bit more fatigued on the first day or two, but it's nothing major. That is how we're supposed to feel during our bleed, okay? In saying that, during our bleed and premenstrual, this is where we need to honor the slug, which I'm going to talk more about that in a moment as well. But when it comes to our period or bleed, it's important to note that your your menstrual cycle doesn't start the day your period finishes. It starts the first day of your bleed. Phase 2, which is follicular, this is where pretty much the bleeding starts to stop. Estrogen starts to creep up. We start feeling good, motivated, and strong, okay? Technically, we're in our follicular phase until we get to ovulation, okay? And this is where our body is most primed to push the envelope and make progress. With our luteal phase, which is phase 3, this begins once ovulation has finished. During this phase, luteinizing hormone races back down, progesterone slowly begins to rise, and our body temp gently starts to increase. This is where you may notice that you feel a little bit more hot, a little bit more irritable. You may struggle sleeping a little bit as well, and you also may notice the increase in hunger. With that increase in body temp, we do tend to actually increase our calorie burn slightly. And this adds to our overall burn of the day, which can increase our cravings and that sort of a thing as well. Okay, it's important to know that during our luteal phase, or the second half of our cycle as well, that when it comes to what we're craving, we often are depleted in nutrients, period. Okay, pardon the pun. But what I want you to think about is when we're depleted in nutrients, typically in the second half of our cycle, carbohydrates are fantastic for our recovery and fantastic for our brain health and our hormone health, but we don't actually break them down as well. So this is where I like to try and prioritize, because we are a little bit more insulin resistant in this phase, a little bit more fats, nourishing carbs from my veggies, and then making sure that, again, the fats that I'm choosing might be in the meat. So think wild caught salmon, think a nice cut of steak, or of course, cooking things up in some beautiful ghee, avocado, Brazil nuts, that sort of a thing. Then finally, we have phase 4, which is premenstrual. So this is a few days leading up to our bleed. This is ideally where, if the symptoms are coming, this is where they are. Okay. And this is where we're looking only really for fatigue, but probably not that much as well. Okay. Premenstrual is just basically where progesterone has reached its peak and then begun to make its descent. Progesterone is a good hormone. And so it's important to remember that without progesterone, we can bump into a lot of other health and hormone issues as well, like a low energy, fatigue, hot flushes, everything else. Just like everything, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, and too little is also quite similar. So we need to find the right spot on the continuum, which is why, as women, as cyclical beings, we have a rise and fall of progesterone. Okay. When we are experiencing the high stress and the hormonal imbalances, it's typically where we're going to get little to no reprieve leading up to our bleed. With an optimal cycle, the only symptoms you may experience should be a slight dip in energy levels, maybe a little bit more irritability. Okay. But overall, if you are still able to function as normal, it's probably actually a good thing that your hormones are really nice and aligned. Now, just because symptoms can be common, okay, think bloating, think really sore back pain, think a sore pelvis, okay, think angry, mood swings. Just because these symptoms are common doesn't mean they're normal, okay? So when it comes to our symptoms, often what we'll find is that it's pretty standard between your friend group, okay? And we can talk about cycle syncing, but with your friend group, you probably find you all crave similar sorts of things. You all have similar sorts of, oh, my periods suck, so I smash it with naproxen and Panadol, that sort of a thing. Okay, it's important to note that cramps, painful ones as well, around the uterus, the lower back, and the pelvis, it feels like almost nothing will subside them. This is typically a sign that there may be a little bit of a hormone imbalance at play here, where we have overshot our ability to push our bodies and not giving ourselves enough recovery and love during the month to help to regulate our hormones in our nervous system and our cycle. There's also overpowering cravings. Now, there's a difference between feeling, I would really love that chocolate, or that bread looks really, really nice. And then there's a difference between, I physically can't stop myself. I feel like a dirty raccoon in the back of my pantry, and I just can't stop eating the peanut butter, the M&Ms, everything in between. Okay. Feeling the uncontrollable urge to eat everything in sight and create meal combinations that would make a nonna roll over in her grave is not a sign of a balanced cycle. And so it's important to remember, in the second half of our cycle anyways, we're going to be slightly more depleted with our nutrients. And so with this, when we bump our nutrients up, the general cravings should come and go. They shouldn't be overpowering and insatiable. And then, of course, we have excessive bleeding. So if you're changing your tampon more than every 2 hours, or you're passing clots bigger than a 5-cent coin, this is a sign of excessive bleeding. Now, I didn't touch on my story in the beginning, but I was very lucky in high school that with all my hormonal imbalances at play, I thought I had endometriosis for quite a while. I would get my period every 28 days, only it would be lots of bleeding, and it would last between 9 to 11 days, which is an extremely long cycle for one that comes very regularly every 4 weeks. With that excessive bleeding, blood was just coming out of me so much. And so with this, I didn't know, and I thought it was something more awry that had developed into endometriosis. And I was very fortunate that through addressing lifestyle behaviors, through understanding that my menstrual cycle isn't something that holds me back, and it's actually something that empowers me to live an aligned life and move forward and nourish my body, seeing it again as a vital sign and a feedback loop, I was able to change my cycle to the point where now it does only last 3 to 5 days. It is only a light bleed, and I do experience very minimal symptoms, if any at all. Side note, it's important to note at the time of this recording, I am a few weeks out from a bodybuilding competition. And in saying that and the hormonal imbalance, I have actually lost my cycle leading up into this competition. This happens when we hit a body fat that's too low and there's too much stress on the body, that basically our body is just like, you're not giving me enough food. You're running me into the ground. Okay, I'm going to give you some bad symptoms first, okay, to let you know. I'm going to let you know that you are not looking after yourself properly. And if you don't listen to me enough, I'm not letting you have a baby. I'm not letting you stay fertile. Okay. And then we lose our cycle. Now, the funny thing is, sometimes we can think that's more convenient, losing our cycle. Only the important thing to understand is usually when you first lose your cycle, there's a huge tug of war with your hormones. Everything is raging. Okay. And then it goes, and all of a sudden, you sort of constantly feel like you're in your luteal phase. Okay. So mentally, physically, you're always feeling a little bit more drained, a little bit more sore. For every cycle and every period lost, you actually lose a little bit of bone density, which depending on your age can be very hard to get back. So this also means if you're taking hormonal contraception, for every cycle that you miss, you can be potentially decreasing your bone density. As women, we are more prone to osteoporosis. So when it comes to losing your cycle, it is not convenient. Okay, it is a feedback loop and it is a vital sign for your health that helps you to honor you being in the best state and the best state of wellness as possible. So as much as I may have lost it, as much as I can sort of give you all of the reasons of how maybe it is a little bit more convenient because I can focus on work, that sort of a thing, it's not any sort of a state to actually live. And so that's what I really want to highlight as well, is I don't want to be sort of, what's the word, hypocritical, but I do want to state that in terms of managing hormonal imbalances, you get given a chance again, do it enough times, your body will begin to fight back and shut down vital processes. Now, without addressing our lifestyle factors first, it's really important to note that we are simply robbing Peter to pay Paul. Okay, so often what happens is we experience menstrual symptoms. Okay, they're crazy, they're painful, and instead of addressing anything to do with our lifestyle, all we do is we get on the pill or we get on some form of hormonal contraception that slows down and stops our natural production of hormones, or we just pump the Nurofen and the Panadol. Okay, without addressing your lifestyle factors, you are simply just pushing it off to a later date. And by shoving down your symptoms instead of acknowledging them, what's going to end up happening is something more intense ends up manifesting at that later date. So usually you'll find that you can start to get into more intense symptoms that can then develop into something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is complete loss of your cycle. There are many things, okay, where we need to remember that when we can have a lifestyle that aligns with the healthiest version of us, okay, the most well version of us, that is what we want to be prioritizing and chasing. So what does that look like? Nutrition and training during your period or your bleed, we have a priority, and that is just minimizing systemic fatigue. Now, systemic fatigue is basically where in your brain, you can have a really stressful day at work, and then you go to train and it's like everything feels so fatiguing already. Okay, you have a really stressful day at work and you wake up the next day sore as if you'd done a big gym session, but you hadn't even trained that day. When it comes to systemic fatigue, it's important to note that when the body is stressed, it takes a toll on the entire body. But likewise, when the mind is stressed, it does the same sort of a thing. So during our period or our bleed, we want to ensure that if we need to spend an additional 5 minutes warming up, stretching, making sure we're not feeling too stiff, we're going to help to minimize that systemic fatigue. Okay, we can also keep volume low and RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, how hard you're pushing in the gym, to a 6 to 8, depending on the level of fatigue that could be present. I like to remind myself if it's not there, it's not there. And for myself personally, during my period and bleed and my premenstrual phase, I'll usually prioritize one top set where I push it as hard as I can and then move on to the next exercise, opposed to doing 2 or 3 heavier, harder sets during this time. Then with nutrition, we want to prioritize always nourishing our body with appropriate energy sources for the appropriate tasks. So I want to remind you, carbohydrates around training are a must. The type of training that we do is glycolytic. And this means that when we're doing any sort of resistance training or anything above 60%, you're going to be using carbohydrates. The carbohydrates that you want to be using are primarily going to be from your food, okay, or from your body fat. But often what can happen is that if we're not addressing our nutrients appropriately, and we're not having enough nourishing food, what you'll end up finding is we can end up chewing through the carbohydrates that are stored in our muscle and sometimes losing muscle despite doing our best effort to track everything with macros on MyFitnessPal, simply because we're not prioritizing nourishing food and not prioritizing, again, nourishing foods around the right time of our cycle. So If there's any time to really be like, okay, I'm going to have my little snack for dessert, but I'm going to prioritize in the day. I need to be having a healthy breakfast with some protein. Okay. I need to be having some fats to help regulate my blood glucose. Okay. My blood sugar. And I need to make sure I'm eating some stuff that's higher in omega-3s. This is going to help reduce cell inflammation and encourage cell regeneration instead, which obviously means we look better, we feel better, and we perform better. Now, during your follicular, so we've finished bleeding, and our priority now is to push ourselves with testile limits. This is where our body is in a state where insulin sensitive. So we're going to be using carbohydrates a lot more as well, a lot more effectively. And so with this as well, we'll also find, because testosterone creeps up a bit too, that with this, we can really push our RPE, our rate of perceived exertion. Okay. With perfect technique, I want you to ask yourself in the gym, have I got that extra rep? Okay. Am I beating my previous sprint times? Am I adding an extra 5 kilos? This is where, if you've got it, okay, use the tools in your toolbox. Tell yourself, I am my strongest today, and see what you're capable of under what would typically be your best conditions. With nutrition as well, this is an important time where we're at a state we're going to be most motivated. We're going to be in the best mood. So if we want to set ourselves up for success across the month, this is where, if we want to drop that extra 200 to 250 grams of fat mass, we will reap the most benefits if we choose to do something like intermittent fasting or reducing our calorie intakes further. Now, optimizing nutrition uptake, whatever the goal, is important. So nourishment, of course, but make sure you're consuming high quality proteins, carbs, and fats. Your body, again, can better tolerate carbs typically in this phase. So this is where, if you've got it, you're not that hungry and you are pursuing a fat loss goal, you're like, you know what? Today, I'm going to see if I can shave off an extra 100 calories off my target. Now, typically, working with a coach with this will be the best, because this is where, when it comes to aligning your nutrition with your cycle, we can't tell that we've ovulated and we've entered our luteal phase until after it's happened. So you can be in this phase and you can push the absolute limits. And if you push it too hard, okay, because remember, too much of anything is not a good thing, we can end up then in our luteal phase very quickly eating back the food, because we're a little bit hungrier then, very quickly eating back the food and the calories that we may have burnt off in the previous week from sending it here. So there's an art to sending it. Now, next, with your luteal phase, this is where we want to prioritize doing the best you can with the tools you have. So with training, not every day is going to feel amazing, and this is okay. Sometimes the only reason we will have gone to the gym is because we told ourselves if we got through the first exercise and didn't still want to be there, we could leave. So this is where, again, I like to, similar to my premenstrual phase, if it means getting into the gym and I'm like, okay, here's my deal. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to get through as much of my workout as I can in the next 40 minutes. Or here's the deal. After this, you can go home and you can have a nap. Or here's the deal. After this, I'm going to go into the gym, and then for my session, I'm just going to start with the first exercise. And if I still want to leave, I'm damn going. 9 times out of 10, you'll find you stay there, and you'll find you finish the session. But a little bit of an adjustment where you go in, you're like, okay, let's do the best with the tools that we have in front of us, is what's going to help to set you up for success in the long term. With nutrition, this is where, when it comes to journaling, dear diary, why am I so hungry? So remember what I said, with progesterone increasing, our body temp increases. Our body is literally working overtime and using the spare nutrients at hand to do so. So this is where prioritizing for nourishing foods and allowing, if you do go over your calories by 100 to 300 on top of your maintenance, you're probably actually burning them. And it's not actually you breaking your diet. It's not actually you getting into sort of poor behaviors. It's literally your body saying, hey, I'm in a depleted state. I need more nutrients. Okay. This is where, if you're pursuing a fat loss phase, it's really important to prioritize. I'm going to be feeling more hungry. So instead of giving myself the shitty foods that have zero nutritional value to me, but might tick off the craving sweetness for 30 minutes until after you finish eating. Okay. You want to keep your nutrients as high as possible here. Okay. Your body may need the extra carbs here for energy. So you might want to prioritize a few more of them before your training session and a little bit after. Okay. You might need a little bit more fats around your breakfast to reduce inflammatory load, and again, encourage that cell regeneration so you can feel and perform your best. Then, of course, with premenstrual, priority, honor the slug. Now, I said I was going to talk about the slug, and this is because during my premenstrual phase, I honor my slug. If it's a day, everything's moving slower, I remind myself it takes as long as it takes. Okay. With training and nutrition, because we can bunch this into one, dear diary, why is the world so mean? Why is that puppy so cute? Why is resistance training the last thing I feel like doing? Why am I crying? You can find that you can be crying and it can be happy tears watching a dog on Instagram, or you could find that it could be sad tears watching a movie or something really heartfelt that you may have been hearing in conversation with friends. This is where during this phase of our cycle, okay, typically the few days before our bleed, all of our sex hormones are at the lowest. They're getting ready. They're like, you know what? You didn't give me a baby. I'm tearing the wallpaper down. That wallpaper is your uterine line. Okay. I made this nursery. Now I'm tearing it down. Okay. So when it comes to lower energy levels, lower drive and motivation, it can feel a little bit like a lull, and that's okay. This is where I like to, again, prioritize reducing training volume. Am I doing one really good set for each exercise, or am I setting myself a timer and going in and being like, okay, I'm just going to do what I can in this time frame? I'm prioritizing eating healthy fats and getting clients obviously to do the same, and dropping potentially carbs and sodium. Now, this is because we're more insulin resistant right before our bleed, and typically because digestion is also slow during our luteal phase, so as we lead into our premenstrual, motility, so the time it takes for you to eat something versus it to come out the other end, slows down. We can drop our carbs and drop our salt just a little bit, and that can sometimes help to regulate our water retention, regulate our bloating, and keep our digestion moving at a swimming pace. Then, of course, you can obviously combine the two as well. And this is where it comes to cyclical living. If you've had a big month, okay, you'll notice your symptoms will be strong here. So honor that, reduce that training volume, add in some more healthy fats and potentially drop some carbs and drop a little bit of your salt intake too. Or if you're not dropping salt, you can also increase your potassium by means of bananas, limes, coconut water, and that will help to further hydrate you, reduce bloating and inflammation as well. Now, when it comes to stresses, this is ultimately what's going to help to manage your cycle altogether. And so with this, we want to think of stresses as a dial. So we've got physical stress, psychological stress, emotional stress, and metabolic stress. Now, even though we're in a diet because we've got a goal, that sort of a thing, it's still a stress in our body when we're not eating enough food. Even though we're training's so good for us, I'm strengthening my bone density, I'm building muscle, it's still a stress on our body, okay? When it comes to stress, our body views stress and our nervous system views stress as one big bucket, okay, that we fill up and that we need to get rid of stuff in the bucket often to actually help to regulate our nervous system. A good way of thinking about this is that when you're anxious, your nervous system perceives the exact same emotions as excitement and energy as excitement. Okay, so it doesn't matter, the stress can be good or bad, your nervous system still elevates to this heightened state. Okay, and it's our ability to regulate the few things here, training, career, relationships, and nutrition. If we're sending it with our career and we're really focusing on our relationships, notice you might not have as much time for training and nutrition unless you might be habit stacking. If you're focusing on your training and nutrition, okay, great example is bodybuilding prep. There's so much time that goes into training and nutrition that your career and your relationships can take a hit. Okay, the important thing to remember is that when we look at stress, our expectations is that we can send it with fitness. We can train our absolute butts off, okay? We can eat next to no food and we can prioritize eating salads and meal prepping and everything is on point. With our relationships, we're then going to make sure any spare time that we're not working, we're spending with our friends because we're filling our cups up because we said this year we would fill our cups up more and hang out with people more. And then with our career, we've got big goals. Time is ticking and there is no better time to start and to work hard than right now. It's exhausting. Okay, so we need to look at it instead like this. If fitness is sending it, maybe nutrition and maybe pushing the nutrition stress dial, maybe we can decrease that and we can give you a bit more food so that then your relationships and your fitness can be well looked after. Career just might not be that stressful at the moment, and that's great, okay? If career is super stressful, relationships are pretty chill, maybe you've got some time if you're not spending too much time with people, where you're meal prepping, you're on point, you're not going to meet people for coffee, lunches, dinners, all that sort of a thing. But the reality is, if we send it with everything all the time, we're going to send ourselves straight into a hole. So sometimes the best stress regulator is to give yourself a fucking break. And what I mean by this is that if you are setting the highest standard for yourself with your training, every session I must do, every exercise I must do, every rep that's on this program to the best of my ability, fucking send it. Okay. And then I'm going to leave and I'm going to eat my perfectly curated meal plan. Everything is prepared and everything is prepared in advance and everything is in its little containers and I'm not deviating. And if someone asks to go out for coffee, I'm going to say no. Then we get to the relationships and friendships. Someone asks to go out for coffee, you say no. You're like, well, I'll bring my coffee and I'll sit with you instead. You're trying to make it work. Okay. And then career, all of a sudden your boss says, hey, we've got this deadline due in a month. I need you to really put your foot down and push hard with this. I know you're the best person for the job. Okay. You're going to be fucking exhausted. Okay. Give yourself a break. Focus on one thing at a time and focus on working with someone as well when it comes to planning something out. Work with your friends, work with your boss, work with your colleagues, and collaborate so that you can make things a little bit easier for you to achieve your goals. Okay. It's not impossible to achieve your goals. It usually just requires the right sort of dosage and mind frame. So we have our stress continuum. And this is where I want to touch on where we have too little, and this is little to no progress. We're really not pushing in the gym. We're doing a 4 or 5 RPE. Okay. That's like below warm up. Okay. We've got no set goals. We're like, oh, I'm still showing up, like that's good enough. And this is typically the nothing of the all or nothing equation. With chronic stress, this is where we're doing too much, okay? We're fixating on every single individual entry on MyFitnessPal and every single gram that goes into our food, okay? We can't possibly have 61 grams of kale. It must be 60. Why is this wrong? Why are there so many entries on MyFitnessPal for the same food that are half of them incorrect? Anyways, so we've got consistently training to an RPE 10, undereating, undersleeping, overworking, constantly feeling anxious, no wonder, exhausted, wired, and stressed, and then setting these unrealistic goals, only to end up disappointed every time a hurdle appears. Seeing that hurdle as confirmation that you can't do it, you shouldn't do it, and really, you just need to take a fucking break. So then we have just right. So we're consistently training. We're getting in our 2 to 3 sessions a week, and we're training to an RPE 17. We don't need to push it to a 10, okay? There's literally not much you're going to get out of that other than a little stroke to the ego by pushing to 10. We're eating nutritious foods to fuel our recovery. And if we're eating a little bit more, then we're fueling our recovery. Again, that's going to lead to more muscle growth, more bone density, and all over pretty good stuff. Okay, we're prioritizing stress reduction protocols. So we understand life can get pretty stressful. So learning how to modulate and regulate ourselves is going to be key when it comes to keeping ourselves in the just right stress area. And then, of course, we're pursuing challenging and fulfilling goals. There's a difference between pursuing a challenging goal and having zero fulfillment in it. And there's a difference between pursuing a goal where every challenge that you get presented, you're like, wow, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to learn more about myself. That's where we want to find ourselves in the just right column. And if we're in that too much or too little, we want to really pinpoint and write down, where am I selling myself short because I'm either not setting myself strict goals and showing up to them, or I'm pushing myself to the absolute limit and setting myself these ridiculously high standards. So this is where I like to focus on hormone happy habits to balance everything out. And so with this and hormone happy habits, the most simple way that I can explain it is to be intentional. Okay, that goal that you set yourself to shred, okay, before that holiday. Okay, intentionally, what does it mean to you to be shredded for that holiday? Is there a greater purpose, or is it simply because you're insecure in a bikini and you actually need to work on that? Okay, be intentional with your habits, be intentional with your time, and you're going to notice a lot of your nervous system regulation starts to become a lot easier. Your symptoms become more manageable, and your cycle is more kind to you because you're actually being more kind to yourself. Now, sometimes being intentional obviously means who we spend our conscious time with. And this can mean setting boundaries of who we won't spend time with as well. We like to prioritize connecting with like-minded individuals or loved ones. We have our women's connection mornings. We obviously have our online community as well. And so doing things that promote healthy habits, love, and connection is so important for who we are spending our conscious time with. With pursuing our goals, again, moving with intention means having a purpose and a why behind what you do, when you do it, how long you do it for. By getting clear on our goals, that's step 1. Identifying a plan, that's step 2. But who do we need to become, and how do we step into her to achieve things on a day-to-day basis that lead to our inevitable success down the line? And then spending time with yourself, being intentional with your time and regulating your nervous system also means no mind numbing and binge watching Netflix and scrolling TikTok until the next best distraction comes around. Go for a walk in the morning without your headphones, without your phone. Journal at night with nothing on but the lamp, okay, or a candle. Meditate, take yourself on dates, take yourself to that cafe or that lunch restaurant that you've been wanting and waiting to find a friend who you thought would be cool to go with. Go by yourself, sit there, honor yourself and romance yourself. Create a home internally and externally that you can be proud of and that you have space to reflect that you have created for yourself. That pride from the inside out. So when it comes to being intentional, when it comes to what we put in our mouth, when it comes to how we live, our diet is not only what we eat, it's what we watch, it's who we listen to, it's who we hang out with. So when we're intentional with the things we put into our body, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, our hormones start to regulate, our cycle becomes more kind, and we can start to level up with the best intentions and find our most wellest self. So now it's your turn. In terms of being intentional, I would love for you now to pause, and I would love for you to write down one thing in your life that stuck out to you so much as I was talking through this presentation, that you knew it was sticking out like the big purple elephant in the room, that something needs to shift here and it needs to shift now, and message me what that is. Other than that, I hope you girls enjoyed that presentation, and then I look forward to catching you in the next one.